Hello and welcome. Today, we're diving into the fascinating story of one of the most influential families in European history, the Medici family. From humble beginnings to wielding immense power across Italy and Europe, the Medici family's rise is a story of wealth, political maneuvering, and artistic patronage. They transformed Florence into the heart of the Renaissance, shaped the future of art and culture, and established dynastic rule that lasted centuries. But how did this seemingly unassuming family ascend from modest roots to become the rulers of a great city-state and even hold sway over the papacy and French royalty? And what was the true nature of their power? Let's take a journey through the fascinating history of the Medici family, where we'll uncover their rise, their complex relationships, and the legacy they left behind. The Medici family's rise is tied to their involvement in banking, starting with Giovanni de' Medici in the 14th century. Giovanni laid the financial foundations for what would become a dynasty. His son Cosimo de' Medici further expanded the family's wealth and power, taking control of Florence without ever holding an official title. Cosimo's reign marked the start of the Medici's deep investment in the arts, as he became the patron of artists, philosophers, and scholars. His son Piero de' Medici and grandson Lorenzo il Magnifico de' Medici continued this tradition of patronage while navigating political intrigue and threats to their rule, like the infamous Pazzi conspiracy. But the Medici family's influence wasn't confined to Florence alone. Through strategic marriages, the family extended its power across Europe. One of the most notable figures in this expansion was Catherine de' Medici, the daughter of Lorenzo the Magnificent, who became the queen consort of France. Catherine's role as queen and mother of several French kings made her one of the most powerful women in 16th century Europe. And it wasn't just the political alliances that defined the Medici. Multiple members of the family ascended to the papacy, including Pope Leo X and Pope Clement VII, cementing the family's dominance in both secular and religious spheres. But as we explore the Medici family's influence, we must also acknowledge the complexity of their rise to power. The family's wealth was built on banking, a practice that allowed them to shape political events and manipulate rivals. Their patronage of the arts during the Renaissance undeniably transformed the cultural landscape, yet their political maneuvers often walked a fine line between enlightenment and ruthless ambition. In this documentary, we'll explore the Medici family's legacy and ask, was their power a result of brilliance and cultural vision? Or was it more about money, manipulation, and control? Before we dive deeper into the family's story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever wondered how a banking family could exert such influence across Europe? Or perhaps you're fascinated by their role in the Renaissance. Drop your thoughts and questions in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. And of course, if you're enjoying the story of the Medici family, don't forget to like this video. Subscribe to the channel for more historical deep dives, and share this with friends who might be just as curious about the rise of this powerful family. Let's get started. The story of the Medici family begins not in the grand palaces of Florence, but in the rural village of Cafaggiolo located in the heart of Tuscany, Italy. Nestled among rolling hills and lush landscapes, Cafaggiolo was a quiet agricultural community about 20 kilometers north of Florence. It was here in the 12th century that the Medici name first appeared in historical records. Though the family's humble beginnings might seem far removed from the grandeur they would later achieve, these early years played a crucial role in shaping their destiny. In the early days, the Medici family was not known for wealth or power, but rather for their work in agriculture and folk medicine. While they were certainly not the noblemen of Florence, their presence in the area grew as they expanded their influence through practical skills and community involvement. It's believed that an early Medici ancestor was a healer or medico, practicing folk medicine rather than the scientific medicine that would later emerge in Europe. This connection to healing would form the foundation for the family's name Medici, derived from the word medico, meaning doctor or physician in Italian. Though the exact details of their early members remain unclear, it's evident that the Medici family's rise was linked to their ability to thrive in a rapidly changing economic landscape. During the 12th and 13th centuries, Europe was experiencing a period of increasing commerce and urbanization. Florence, in particular, was emerging as a major hub for trade and finance with its strategic location along trade routes and its thriving wool industry. As the city grew, the need for services such as banking and medicine also expanded. By the 13th century, the Medici family had moved to Florence, where their financial dealings began to take root. As their fortunes grew, they became involved in the rapidly expanding banking sector, leveraging their skills in commerce and finance to gain a foothold in one of Italy's most prosperous city-states. At this point, they were not yet the titans of banking that they would later become, but their early success in business marked the beginning of their rise to prominence. The family's wealth and influence grew incrementally thanks to their astute business practices. Their connections within the growing merchant class of Florence and their initial involvement in the city's banking sector. The Medici surname is a fitting testament to the family's origins and the role they would play in history. The word Medici is thought to derive from the Italian word medico, meaning doctor or physician, linking the family's earliest ancestors to the healing arts. It's believed that the Medici family's connection to medicine began with a single ancestor who was known for his ability to heal through folk medicine, likely practicing rudimentary techniques in a time before scientific methods had fully taken root in Europe. In a period where medical knowledge was limited, folk healers often relied on herbal remedies, natural cures, and religious practices to treat the sick. However, the Medici's connection to medicine wasn't simply a matter of personal healing practices. It was also tied to their understanding of how to expand their influence within society. Medicine, particularly in medieval and Renaissance Italy, was a valuable and respected profession. Those who could cure illnesses, especially in an era where disease and plague were rampant, were highly regarded. The Medici family therefore established themselves early on as trusted figures within their communities, not just because of their financial success, but also because of their perceived knowledge of healing and well-being. By the time Giovanni di Bici de' Medici, the founder of the Medici banking empire, came into power in the 14th century, the family was already established as key players in Florence. Giovanni's success in banking and his ability to accumulate wealth through loans and financial dealings allowed the Medici family to not only grow in affluence, but also to maintain a prestigious position in society. Giovanni's wealth came from his ability to understand the economics of banking, but also from his knack for maintaining good relationships with powerful figures in Florence. By establishing himself as both a financier and a man of influence, Giovanni was able to set the Medici family on a trajectory that would lead them to prominence. While the Medici family's connection to medicine was part of their early identity, it was their engagement with banking and commerce that truly propelled them into the public eye. The family used their wealth and resources to form strategic alliances, establishing themselves as patrons of the arts, politics, and eventually the papacy. Their name, originally associated with healing, would soon be synonymous with power, wealth, and cultural renaissance. Yet the early days of the Medici were still marked by their close association with folk medicine, a reminder of their humble origins and their deep roots in the community that would form the foundation for their eventual domination of Florence and beyond. As the Medici family grew in power, their initial connection to medicine became a symbol of their ability to wield influence not only through financial means, but also through cultural and intellectual patronage. The Medicis, particularly under the leadership of Cosimo de' Medici and Lorenzo de' Medici, would go on to sponsor some of the greatest artists, philosophers, and architects of the Renaissance, forever linking their name with the cultural rebirth of Europe. However, their early ties to folk medicine, represented by their name, are an important part of understanding the true nature of the Medici family's power. It wasn't just about money, it was about cultivating trust, maintaining influence, and using their position to shape the world around them. In the late 13th and early 14th centuries, Florence, a republic known for its wealthy merchants and skilled bankers, was beginning to see a transformation in its economic and political landscape. It was within this rapidly changing environment that the Medici family would begin their rise from humble beginnings in the countryside of Tuscany to one of the wealthiest and most influential families in Europe. Central to their rise was the establishment of the Medici Bank, an enterprise that would propel them into the highest echelons of Florence's political and cultural world. The roots of the Medici Bank can be traced to Giovanni di Bici de' Medici, the patriarch of the Medici family, who laid the foundation for the family's future dominance. Giovanni, born in 1360, was a man of vision, ambition, and sharp business acumen. In the late 14th century, Italy's city-states were engaged in fierce competition for wealth and influence, and Giovanni saw an opportunity to build wealth by establishing a financial institution that could cater to the needs of Florence's bustling mercantile society. The Medici Bank was founded in 1397, a time when banking was a relatively new and rapidly expanding industry in Italy. Florence, with its strategic position in trade, was an ideal place for a banking institution to thrive. Giovanni's business was not just a simple enterprise to lend money. It was a comprehensive operation that helped merchants facilitate trade across Europe from Rome to Bruges and from Milan to London. Giovanni quickly saw the potential of offering not just loans, but also letters of credit, which allowed merchants to trade across long distances without the need to carry large sums of money. The Medici Bank's success was driven by Giovanni's ability to secure important clients, most notably the papacy. Giovanni recognized that the Catholic Church, with its vast financial resources, was a powerful institution that could be a key to expanding his bank's influence. By lending large sums of money to the Pope, Giovanni built strong ties with the Vatican, which would benefit the Medici family for generations. In fact, the Medici Bank became one of the most important financial institutions in the world during this period, with branches in key cities across Europe, including Rome, Milan, Bruges, and Lyon. In addition to offering traditional banking services, like lending, Giovanni's bank played a vital role in financing the great public projects of the time, from supporting the construction of churches and monasteries to funding military campaigns. The Medici Bank was intertwined with Florence's politics, arts, and economy, and its influence extended far beyond the city-state itself. One of Giovanni's greatest successes as a banker was his ability to navigate the treacherous waters of European politics. The papal schism, which divided the Catholic Church between two rival popes, provided Giovanni with an opportunity to expand his family's wealth. The schism, which began in 1378 and lasted for decades, created a situation where Giovanni had to carefully align himself with the right side in order to maintain his bank's prosperity. Giovanni initially supported Pope John XXIII, the pope based in Rome during the early stages of the schism. This move, although risky, ultimately paid off. By lending money to the papacy, Giovanni ensured that the Medici family became financially indispensable to the church. His connections with the papacy helped the Medici Bank secure a position as one of the most powerful financial institutions in Europe. Giovanni's decision to support the papacy during the schism was not without risks, but his astute business decisions ultimately paid off. The Medici Bank's ties to the Vatican provided the family with access to vast sums of money and placed them at the center of European politics and religion. Giovanni's ability to navigate the complexities of the papal schism while expanding the Medici Bank's influence in Europe cemented his legacy as the architect of the Medici family's prosperity. Another factor that contributed to the Medici Bank's success was Giovanni's understanding of international finance. He established branches in key cities such as Bruges, Lyon, and Geneva which were major trading hubs at the time. These international connections gave the Medici family access to vast networks of merchants, traders, and aristocrats, further solidifying their influence in Europe's economic affairs. Under Giovanni's leadership, the Medici Bank became the financial backbone of Florence, and the Medici family's wealth began to grow exponentially. Giovanni's ability to establish strong connections with influential political and religious figures, particularly the papacy, laid the groundwork for the Medici family's future dominance in both Florence's political scene and the broader European stage. By the time Giovanni died in 1429, the Medici Bank was at its peak. The family had expanded its wealth and influence to an extent that no other banking family in Europe could match. However, after Giovanni's death, the Medici family faced challenges in maintaining the bank's dominance. Although Giovanni's son, Cosimo de' Medici, took over the management of the family business, he would be forced to navigate a new set of political dynamics, including the rise of powerful rival banking families and the complexities of governing Florence itself. Despite these challenges, Cosimo would continue to build on Giovanni's legacy and would ultimately elevate the Medici family to unprecedented levels of power. Giovanni's legacy as a financier and strategist endures to this day. His business acumen and his ability to navigate the complex political landscape of 14th century Europe were instrumental in the rise of the Medici family. His vision laid the foundation for the Medici dynasty's dominance in Florence and beyond, and his influence on European banking and finance is still felt today. Giovanni's establishment of the Medici Bank marked the beginning of a remarkable journey for the Medici family, one that would see them rise from modest beginnings to become one of the most powerful and influential families in European history. The Medici family's rise in banking was not the only factor contributing to their political power in Florence. By the early 15th century, the family had begun to consolidate power in Florence's political scene, using their wealth to gain influence and control. Unlike other powerful families in Italy, such as the Visconti of Milan or the Sforza family, the Medici chose not to establish themselves as hereditary monarchs. Instead, they worked within the framework of Florence's republican government, manipulating the system to secure their interests while maintaining the outward appearance of a republic. The Medici family's involvement in Florence's politics began with Salvestro de' Medici, a prominent member of the family who served as gonfaloniere, the head of the government in 1378. The position of gonfaloniere was essentially that of the chief magistrate of Florence, a role that was elected annually and wielded significant political power. Salvestro's tenure coincided with a time of political unrest in Florence, particularly the Chiompi Revolt, which was a popular uprising by the city's working-class laborers. The revolt was driven by tensions between the wealthy elite and the poor, who demanded better wages and working conditions. Although Salvestro was not a direct ruler of Florence, his role in the Chiompi Revolt was pivotal in shaping the Medici family's political future. While the revolt itself was unsuccessful, It demonstrated the growing social and economic divides within Florence. Salvestro de' Medici's involvement in the revolt and his position as gonfaloniere helped to cement the family's status as key players in Florence's political life. However, it was his successor, Cosimo de' Medici, who would truly consolidate the Medici family's power and transform Florence into a city-state dominated by their influence. After Giovanni di Bicci's death in 1429, Cosimo de' Medici took control of the family's banking empire and began to assert his influence over Florence's political scene. Unlike his father, Cosimo did not seek to rule Florence outright. Instead, he preferred to control the city through a carefully constructed network of allies and family members. His political strategy was subtle yet effective. Cosimo understood that in order to maintain control of Florence, he needed to dominate the city's elected positions without ever appearing to be a despot. By placing his supporters and relatives in key political roles, Cosimo was able to manipulate the signoria, the city's governing council, to secure his influence. This system allowed Cosimo to effectively rule Florence without the need for a title or military force, maintaining the facade of a republican government while enjoying the power of a ruler. Cosimo's political maneuvering was especially successful because of his ability to remain in the background and avoid overtly challenging Florence's republican system. His control over the signoria, combined with his vast wealth from the Medici Bank, gave him unprecedented power in Florence. Cosimo's political dominance also allowed him to shape Florence's cultural landscape. His patronage of the arts and sponsorship of the Renaissance helped to solidify his reputation as not only a powerful politician, but also a visionary leader. Through his political and cultural influence, Cosimo de' Medici elevated the Medici family from being mere bankers to becoming one of the most important dynasties in European history. Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici, the patriarch of the Medici family, was the man who laid the foundation for the family's wealth and political power. Giovanni was born into a modest family in 1360, and his rise from humble beginnings to the head of one of the most powerful banking dynasties in Europe is a testament to his shrewdness, vision, and business acumen. Giovanni di Bicci's decision to enter the banking industry was a pivotal moment, not only in the history of the Medici family, but also in the history of Florence itself. Giovanni founded the Medici Bank in 1397, a time when Italy's city-states were beginning to establish themselves as economic powerhouses. Giovanni saw an opportunity to profit from the flourishing trade and merchant economy that was emerging in Florence. The Medici Bank was established as a family-run institution, and Giovanni's business practices quickly set it apart from other banks in the region. He offered loans to both individuals and businesses, facilitated trade through letters of credit, and helped to establish a system of banking that could be used across Europe. Giovanni's ability to establish branches in major cities such as Rome, Lyon, and Bruges, gave the Medici family international reach and influence, something that few other banks at the time could claim. The Papal Schism, which divided the Catholic Church between two rival papacies, provided Giovanni with an opportunity to expand his family's wealth. During this tumultuous period, Giovanni aligned himself with Pope John, who was based in Rome. By lending money to the papacy, Giovanni ensured that the Medici family became financially indispensable to the church. His connections with the papacy helped the Medici Bank secure a position as one of the most powerful financial institutions in Europe. Giovanni's decision to support the papacy during the schism was not without risks, but his astute business decisions ultimately paid off. The Medici Bank's ties to the Vatican provided the family with access to vast sums of money and placed them at the center of European politics and religion. Giovanni's ability to navigate the complexities of the Papal Schism while expanding the Medici Bank's influence in Europe cemented his legacy as the architect of the Medici family's prosperity. Giovanni di Bicci's role in establishing the Medici Bank and ensuring its prosperity laid the groundwork for the family's rise to power. His strategic decisions, particularly his relationship with the papacy, allowed the Medici family to expand their wealth and influence across Europe. By the time Giovanni died in 1429, the Medici Bank had grown into one of the most influential financial institutions in Europe, and his son Cosimo de' Medici would take the family's legacy to even greater heights. Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici's legacy as a financier and strategist endures to this day. His business acumen and his ability to navigate the complex political landscape of 14th century Europe were instrumental in the rise of the Medici family. His vision laid the foundation for the Medici dynasty's dominance in Florence and beyond, and his influence on European banking and finance is still felt today. Giovanni's establishment of the Medici Bank marked the beginning of a remarkable journey for the Medici family, one that would see them rise from modest beginnings to become one of the most powerful and influential families in European history. Cosimo de' Medici, born in 1389, was the grandson of Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici, the founder of the Medici Bank, and the key figure who would bring the Medici family to the zenith of power in Italy and beyond. Cosimo's reign marked a pivotal moment not only in the history of Florence, but in the broader Renaissance era. Cosimo's transformative role in both the banking world and Florence's political landscape would shape the destiny of not just his family, but also the entire city-state and the intellectual and artistic movements that defined the Renaissance. Cosimo was born into an era of great political instability, with Florence navigating the turbulent waters of factionalism and political unrest. His father, Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici, had laid the foundation for the Medici family's vast fortune, with the success of the Medici Bank, but it was Cosimo who would expand this legacy into the political and cultural arena. Giovanni's death in 1429 placed the family wealth in the hands of Cosimo, who in his late 30s was already deeply involved in the management of the Medici Bank and had begun to gain experience in the political dynamics of Florence. Though Cosimo inherited a banking empire of great magnitude, he also understood that financial wealth alone would not guarantee power in Florence, a republic filled with powerful rival families and growing instability. To maintain the Medici family's position and to solidify his own, Cosimo realized the necessity of shaping Florence's politics and culture in his favor. Cosimo de' Medici's greatest political asset was his ability to manipulate Florence's republican system while appearing to maintain the illusion of a republic. At the time, Florence was governed by a council of elected officials, including the Signoria, a body of 9 officials who represented various factions of the city's society. Cosimo did not seize power in the traditional sense, nor did he attempt to declare himself a prince. Instead, he worked behind the scenes, placing his allies in key positions of power within the Signoria and other political institutions. By doing so, Cosimo effectively controlled the republic without overtly taking the reins of government. One of Cosimo's major strategies was his ability to influence the election of officials who were sympathetic to the Medici family's interests. He utilized his wealth from the Medici Bank to secure the loyalty of Florence's leading families, buying favors through patronage and political alliances. This allowed him to shape the policies of Florence to his advantage while maintaining the outward appearance of a republican system. Even though Cosimo never assumed an official title of power, he became in essence the unchallenged ruler of Florence. His political mastery became known as behind-the-scenes control, a system that allowed Cosimo to manipulate the republic from the shadows without directly ruling. Cosimo's political acumen was also evident in his diplomacy with other city-states and foreign powers. Throughout his reign, he worked to ensure that Florence remained neutral in larger European conflicts. He used his financial resources to broker alliances with other Italian city-states, and more importantly, with the Vatican. By maintaining a favorable relationship with the papacy, Cosimo secured the Medici Bank's access to key papal finances, further solidifying his political influence. This careful political maneuvering allowed the Medici family to expand their influence and wealth without provoking unnecessary conflict. Cosimo's subtle and strategic rise to power also coincided with the political renaissance in Florence, where the Medici family would shape the political and cultural landscape of the city. Florence was a republic, but the politics of the time were marked by oligarchic rule, where wealth and influence played a key role in governance. Cosimo's mastery in controlling the levers of power would become the foundation for the Medici family's dominance in Italy for centuries to come. His reign marked the dawn of the Medici family's influence in Europe, with their rise in power, paralleling the Renaissance's expansion in art culture and philosophy. Cosimo's political legacy would go on to influence his descendants, who would continue to use their wealth and political savvy to maintain power. By shaping Florence into a cultural and intellectual hub, Cosimo de' Medici laid the groundwork for the subsequent golden age of the Renaissance. His political prowess, combined with his patronage of the arts, turned Florence into a beacon of culture wealth and intellectual achievement. While Cosimo de' Medici's political strategy ensured his family's dominance, it was his patronage of the arts that would cement his legacy as one of the most important figures in the history of the Renaissance. In the same way that Cosimo had inherited the financial empire built by his father, Giovanni, he also inherited the family's commitment to the arts and culture. However, Cosimo's contributions to the arts would far surpass his father's legacy, establishing Florence as the unrivaled center of Renaissance art philosophy and learning. Cosimo de' Medici was a man of great intellectual curiosity and vision. He deeply believed in the power of art to shape society and elevate the human experience. He saw patronizing artists not just as an act of personal enrichment, but as a means of enhancing the prestige and influence of Florence itself. At a time when the Italian city-states were in a period of political and economic flux, Cosimo saw art as a tool that could elevate the city of Florence to a cultural and intellectual peak, fostering both pride and a sense of civic identity. Following in his father's footsteps, Cosimo became a key patron of both religious and secular art. He was instrumental in commissioning numerous architectural and artistic works in Florence, supporting artists such as Donatello, Filippo Brunelleschi, Michelozzo di Bartolomeo, and Fra Angelico. One of the most iconic works of the period, Donatello's David, was created under Cosimo's patronage. This bronze sculpture, which was the first life-size, freestanding nude since antiquity, epitomized the Medici family's embrace of the classical ideals of humanism and their commitment to artistic innovation. Cosimo's patronage wasn't just about creating beautiful works of art. It was also about securing Florence's position as the artistic and intellectual center of Europe. He commissioned architectural projects, such as the Palazzo Medici, designed by Michelozzo, which became a model for Renaissance palaces. He also supported the work of Brunelleschi, commissioning him to design the famous dome of the Florence Cathedral, a monumental feat of engineering that would stand as a testament to Florence's architectural prowess. One of Cosimo's most significant contributions to the cultural Renaissance was his establishment of the Medici Library, which would become a vital center for the study and preservation of classical texts. Under Cosimo's patronage, the library became a hub for humanist scholars, fostering the study of ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, science, and literature. Cosimo saw the preservation of classical knowledge as central to the intellectual revival of his time, and worked tirelessly to bring back lost manuscripts from the Byzantine Empire. Cosimo's commitment to humanism The intellectual movement that sought to revive the study of classical antiquity was central to Florence's artistic renaissance. By commissioning translations of key classical texts and funding scholars like Marsilio Ficino and Niccolo de Niccoli Cosimo, played a pivotal role in the humanist movement that defined the Renaissance. The scholars supported by Cosimo would go on to translate important works by philosophers such as Plato and Aristotle, laying the intellectual foundation for the Renaissance's philosophical and artistic developments. In this way, Cosimo de' Medici was not only a patron of artists, but also a key supporter of intellectual thought, encouraging the fusion of art, science, and philosophy. His patronage was crucial in turning Florence into a cultural center where art and intellectual thought flourished in tandem, setting the stage for future generations of thinkers and artists to shape the Western world. Cosimo de' Medici's ability to control Florence through financial power and political strategy made him one of the most powerful men in Europe. Yet he never took the title of ruler or monarch. This strategic approach allowed Cosimo to enjoy immense power while maintaining the facade of a republican Florence, which remained important for both its citizens and his political maneuvering. In Florence, the political system was based on a republican structure where elected officials made decisions for the city-state. Although the republic had many factions and families vying for control, Cosimo de' Medici managed to gain dominance by influencing the elections to key political offices such as the Signoria, the governing council. He did not seek to replace the republican system, but instead he manipulated it, placing his allies in positions of power. By doing so, Cosimo became the de facto ruler of Florence without ever holding an official title. In addition to influencing elections, Cosimo used his financial power to maintain influence over the city's politics. By controlling the Medici Bank, which was the most powerful banking institution in Italy at the time, he could support those loyal to him financially, ensuring that the Medici family's interests were safeguarded. Cosimo's wealth allowed him to create a vast network of allies, both within Florence and across Europe. He was able to exert influence over the city's political decisions by using his financial resources as leverage. Cosimo's diplomatic acumen was also a key element of his strategy. He understood that in order to maintain the Medici family's position, it was essential to build strong relationships with other city-states, powerful families, and the church. Cosimo used his financial influence to form strategic alliances with other European powers, including the papacy. By securing his position as a trusted ally of the Pope, Cosimo ensured that the Medici family remained at the center of European politics. During his reign, Cosimo was involved in numerous diplomatic negotiations, and helped broker peace between rival Italian city-states. He used diplomacy to secure Florence's place as a neutral power in Italy's ongoing wars, often playing competing factions against one another to his advantage. His ability to navigate complex political situations and form lasting alliances with powerful figures across Europe solidified the Medici family's standing as one of the most influential dynasties in Europe. Cosimo de' Medici's strategy of controlling Florence through financial power, political influence, and diplomacy was a model that would be followed by his descendants. His reign marked the beginning of the Medici family's dominance in Europe, and the political infrastructure he built laid the foundation for the family's influence for generations to come. By maintaining the appearance of a republic while exercising absolute control over Florence, Cosimo demonstrated an understanding of the delicate balance between power, perception, and politics. Cosimo's political strategy would inspire future generations of Medici rulers who would continue to wield power over Florence and Tuscany while maintaining a facade of republican rule. His legacy as a master of political strategy and diplomacy would influence not only the Medici family, but also the broader political culture of Renaissance Italy. Through his combination of banking diplomacy and patronage of the arts, Cosimo de' Medici created a legacy that would shape the political, economic, and cultural landscape of Florence for centuries. His ability to navigate the complexities of Renaissance politics and his contributions to the cultural and intellectual revival of the time cemented his place as one of the most important figures in European history. The Medici family, through their patronage of the arts, literature, philosophy, and science, fundamentally shaped the course of the Renaissance. This cultural and intellectual movement, which spanned roughly from the 14th to the 17th century, profoundly impacted not only Italy, but the entire Western world. Florence, under the Medici family's guidance, became the undisputed epicenter of this revival of classical learning and artistic expression. At the heart of the Medici family's influence during the Renaissance was their unrivaled patronage of the arts. Cosimo de' Medici, the first true leader of the Medici family, began the family's tradition of supporting artists, and his legacy would be carried forward by his descendants. The Medici's substantial financial resources allowed them to commission some of the most iconic works in art history, many of which are still revered today. One of the most renowned artists who flourished under the Medici's patronage was Donatello. Donatello's contributions to sculpture, particularly his famous work David, which became a symbol of Florence's civic pride, embodied the spirit of the Renaissance. Cosimo's support for Donatello helped the artist push the boundaries of sculpture, incorporating classical ideals of proportion, perspective, and humanism into his works. Another major figure patronized by the Medici family was Filippo Brunelleschi, whose work revolutionized architecture during the Renaissance. Cosimo de' Medici financed Brunelleschi's most iconic project, the dome of the Florence Cathedral, which when completed in 1436 was a marvel of engineering and a symbol of Florence's renewed sense of civic pride. Brunelleschi's dome was the first of its kind to be built without scaffolding, and its construction represented both the Renaissance's technical ingenuity and its reverence for classical antiquity. As the Medici family's wealth and power grew, so too did their patronage of other great artists, including Sandro Botticelli, Leonardo da Vinci, and Michelangelo. Botticelli's works, including The Birth of Venus and Primavera, are considered icons of the Renaissance. His collaboration with the Medici family helped define the era's artistic style with an emphasis on beauty, grace, and the human form. Michelangelo, who would later achieve worldwide fame for his work on the Sistine Chapel ceiling, began his career under the Medici family's patronage. His early sculptures, such as the statue of David, were funded by the Medici, and the family's support helped him gain access to the artistic and intellectual circles that would shape his career. The Medici's sponsorship of artists was not limited to painting and sculpture alone. They also supported the development of music theater and literature, cementing Florence's position as the center of Renaissance culture. This vibrant cultural environment encouraged creativity and intellectual exchange, which led to significant innovations in art, philosophy, and science. The Renaissance also saw a resurgence of interest in the classical texts of ancient Greece and Rome, and the Medici family played a key role in this revival. Humanism, the intellectual movement that sought to revive the classical ideals of antiquity, became the driving force behind Renaissance thought. Humanists believed in the inherent dignity and potential of human beings and emphasized the importance of education, critical thinking, and the study of classical literature, rhetoric, and philosophy. Cosimo de' Medici, a keen patron of learning, was instrumental in reviving humanist scholarship in Florence. His support for Marsilio Ficino, a scholar and philosopher, was crucial in the transmission of Platonic thought. Ficino was tasked with translating and preserving many of Plato's works, and his influence on the intellectual life of Florence was profound. Ficino founded the Platonic Academy in Florence, which became a hub for the study of ancient philosophy and attracted scholars from across Europe. The Medici family also funded Niccolò Machiavelli, one of Italy's most important political philosophers. Machiavelli's works, especially The Prince, are still studied today for their insights into power politics and human nature. Though Machiavelli was not directly funded by the Medici family, the family's patronage of other scholars created an intellectual climate that allowed Machiavelli to flourish. Another key figure in the literary Renaissance was Petrarch, who is often considered the father of humanism. Although he lived before the Medici's rise to power, his works influenced the intellectual climate that Cosimo and his family would later patronize. Petrarch's rediscovery of classical texts laid the groundwork for the Renaissance's embrace of ancient Greek and Roman ideals. The Medici family's influence also extended to the world of science. Cosimo de' Medici's patronage of science helped to foster an environment in which intellectuals and scientists could challenge traditional views and expand human knowledge. The Medici's support of Galileo Galilei was especially significant. Galileo's groundbreaking work in physics and astronomy would forever change the way humanity viewed the universe. Under the Medici's patronage, Galileo worked as a professor at the University of Pisa and later at the University of Padua, where his work on the telescope and heliocentrism paved the way for modern science. The Medici family's support of scientific inquiry was not limited to astronomy. They also sponsored the development of new fields of study, including anatomy medicine and engineering. The Medici family understood that the cultivation of knowledge and the advancement of scientific ideas were integral to the flourishing of society. Their support of intellectual endeavors helped to lay the groundwork for the scientific revolution, which would come to full fruition in the centuries after the Medici era. Through their patronage of art, literature, philosophy, and science, the Medici family transformed Florence into the heart of the Renaissance. Their influence shaped not just the cultural and intellectual life of Italy, but the broader European world. Florence became a beacon of human achievement, and the Medici family's contributions to the arts and sciences would have a lasting impact on the development of Western civilization. Cosimo de' Medici's rule over Florence was characterized by careful political maneuvering, financial influence, and an emphasis on civic harmony. However, his power was not without its challenges, and in 1433, he was exiled from Florence for a brief but significant period of time. The events that led to Cosimo's exile were tied to the turbulent political climate in Florence and the rivalry between the Medici family and other powerful factions within the city. At the time, Florence was governed by a republican system, which was fragile and susceptible to factionalism. The Medici family, despite their immense wealth and influence, did not formally rule the city. Instead, they used their financial power to support loyal allies within the Republican government. However, as Cosimo's influence grew, so did the resentment of his political rivals, particularly the Palestrozzi family, who saw the Medici as a threat to their own power. In 1433, Cosimo's political rivals succeeded in having him arrested and charged with treason, accusing him of plotting to overthrow the Republic. Although there was little evidence to support these claims, the political climate in Florence was such that Cosimo's enemies were able to use the accusation as a pretext to remove him from power. Cosimo was promptly imprisoned, and his assets were seized by the government. However, the Medici family was not easily defeated. Cosimo's allies within the city, including several prominent political figures, worked tirelessly to secure his release. Despite being forced into exile, Cosimo's political influence did not wane. He used his time in exile to further cement his position as a key figure in the political landscape of Florence. Cosimo's exile was short-lived, and in 1434, just 1 year later, he was allowed to return to Florence. His return was not the result of a military victory or violent conflict, but rather the result of his diplomatic skill and the loyalty he had cultivated over the years. During his time in exile, Cosimo had built a network of allies both within Florence and outside of it, and he used this network to orchestrate a peaceful return to power. The political situation in Florence had changed during Cosimo's absence. The Republic's political factions had become divided, and the anti-Medici sentiment that had led to Cosimo's exile had begun to wane. In 1434, with the support of his allies, Cosimo was able to return to Florence and resume his position as the de facto ruler of the city. His return was a triumph not just for Cosimo, but for the Medici family as a whole. It solidified the family's political position in Florence and marked the beginning of a new chapter in their rise to power. Cosimo's return to Florence was not simply a political victory, it was a moment that marked the beginning of the Medici family's dominance over the city. After his return, Cosimo worked swiftly to consolidate his power and neutralize his political enemies. He used his influence over the Signoria, the city's governing council, to ensure that his allies were placed in key positions. Cosimo's allies in the government, many of whom had been instrumental in his return, helped him to maintain control over Florence's political machinery. One of Cosimo's key strategies after his return was to strengthen the Medici Bank, which served as the financial backbone of his political power. By expanding the bank's operations both in Florence and across Europe, Cosimo ensured that the Medici family would have the financial resources necessary to maintain their dominance. The Medici Bank became an even more important tool for consolidating power as it allowed Cosimo to support his political allies and to neutralize any factions that might threaten his authority. In addition to his political and financial maneuvers, Cosimo also sought to improve his relationship with the Papal State and other city-states in Italy. By aligning himself with the Pope and other powerful figures, Cosimo was able to secure Florence's position as a neutral power in the increasingly volatile political landscape of Italy. This strategic diplomacy, combined with his financial clout, allowed Cosimo to maintain Florence's independence and further solidified his position as one of the most powerful figures in Italy. Cosimo's return to power in 1434 marked the beginning of a period of unparalleled influence for the Medici family. Over the following decades, Cosimo de' Medici would use his wealth, political acumen, and diplomatic skills to make the Medici family the undisputed rulers of Florence. His reign also set the stage for the cultural and intellectual flourishing of the Renaissance, as Cosimo became one of the leading patrons of the arts, science, and philosophy. While Cosimo's political rule was not absolute in the traditional sense, he never sought to declare himself a duke or monarch. His control over Florence was firm and long-lasting. His success in navigating the complex political and social dynamics of the time, combined with his legacy as a patron of the arts and intellectual life, ensured that the Medici family would remain one of the most powerful dynasties in Europe for centuries to come. Catherine de' Medici, born in 1519, is one of the most influential figures in European history. Her life story is a complex tapestry woven with politics, tragedy, and extraordinary power. Initially, an orphan and a foreigner in France, Catherine would go on to become one of the most formidable women of the 16th century. Not just as queen consort of Henry II of France, but as a regent for her sons who would eventually rule France. Catherine's early life was marked by loss. Her mother, Madeleine de la Tour d'Auvergne, passed away shortly after her birth, and her father, Lorenzo de' Medici, Duke of Urbino, died when she was a young child. Catherine was sent to France as a part of a political marriage arrangement. As the Medici family, despite their wealth and cultural influence, lacked direct political power. Her marriage to Henry, Duke of Orleans, was meant to strengthen the bond between the Medici family and the French monarchy. Henry, though second in line to the throne at the time, would ascend to the French throne as Henry II after the death of his father, Francis I. Their union would produce three kings of France: Francis II, Charles IX, and Henry III. Catherine de' Medici's political influence was secured not through military might, but through her relationships and ability to consolidate power behind the scenes. Despite not being crowned queen until 1547, Catherine used her position as wife of the king to wield significant influence in French politics. After the tragic death of Henry II in a jousting accident in 1559, Catherine was left with three young sons who would each ascend the throne. At this point, Catherine de' Medici's political acumen truly began to shine. She acted as regent during their minority, making decisions that impacted not only France, but Europe at large. Her influence grew as she navigated the challenges of the French wars of religion. Catherine remained neutral, initially trying to keep both Protestant and Catholic factions in balance. However, as the wars escalated, she sided more definitively with the Catholic side. Despite criticism and missteps, her role in maintaining French stability cannot be understated. Catherine de' Medici's legacy is often debated. Some view her as a ruthless power player who used her family connections to manipulate and control the French court, while others view her as a tragic queen caught in the turbulence of religious conflict. What cannot be denied, however, is her central role in shaping France during one of its most tumultuous periods. The Medici family's influence in France was not merely a passing moment. By securing marriages into the French royal family and producing heirs who ascended to the throne, Catherine de' Medici ensured her family's influence for generations. When her son, Francis II, became king, Catherine was immediately thrust into a position of political power. Though young Francis's reign was short-lived, and after his death, his brothers took the throne, all while Catherine continued to wield significant influence over the country. The Medici legacy in France, however, is more than just a product of royal marriages. It is about how these marriages shaped the political, religious, and cultural landscape of the country. Catherine's position as queen consort allowed the Medici family to exert their influence beyond Italy. Their power in France became a beacon of Medici political strategy, marrying into powerful families, producing heirs who could continue their lineage, and never hesitating to leverage diplomacy, marriage, and political machinations to secure their place in history. The French Wars of Religion were a series of civil wars between Catholics and Protestants that gripped France for most of the 16th century. These wars were a reflection of the broader religious conflict between Protestantism and Catholicism that was spreading throughout Europe. Catherine de' Medici, ever the pragmatist, tried to navigate these wars without taking an extreme position. However, as the wars dragged on and violence increased, she ultimately sided with the Catholic faction. Her most infamous involvement came with the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572. This event saw thousands of Huguenots French Protestants murdered, an event that has stained Catherine's reputation in history. While her direct involvement remains a subject of debate among historians, the fact remains that this massacre marked a dark chapter in her legacy, and it showcased the lengths she would go to in order to maintain the power of the French crown. During the wars, Catherine's ability to control French politics came from her position at the heart of power. Her children, though young, would continue to rule France, each succeeding the other until Henry III's tragic assassination. Catherine was a key figure in both managing the political structure and maintaining the balance of power between the rival factions in France. Her ability to outmaneuver the nobility and other political elites ensured that the Medici influence lasted long after her death. The legacy of Catherine de' Medici is embedded in the fabric of French history, as she not only helped secure the throne for her sons, but also played a pivotal role in shaping the politics of France during one of its most turbulent periods. Her ability to manage conflict, her political alliances, and her control over the court were central to her family's lasting influence in France. One of the key factors behind the Medici family's enduring political and religious power was their strategic control over the Catholic Church. Over the course of the 16th and early 17th centuries, 4 members of the Medici family ascended to the papacy, further cementing their dominance in both the religious and political spheres. The first Medici pope, Pope Leo X, was one of the most famous popes in history. His papacy, however, was marred by scandal and excess. Known for his lavish spending and indulgent sales to fund the rebuilding of St. Peter's Basilica, Leo X became a controversial figure. His papacy was also significant because of its role in the early stages of the Protestant Reformation, as the indulgences he sold sparked Martin Luther's 95 Theses, which ultimately led to the split between the Catholic Church and the Protestant faith. The second Medici Pope, Pope Clement VII, was another central figure in the family's control of the Church. His papacy, however, was fraught with political difficulties as he struggled to balance the interests of the Church with those of the European monarchs. His decision to refuse King Henry VIII's request for an annulment led to the English Reformation, which further splintered the Catholic Church's influence in Europe. Pope Clement's reign, however, solidified the Medici family's influence over the papacy and its connection to their broader political strategies. The third pope, Pope Pius IV, continued the Medici legacy of control over the Church, particularly through his role in the Council of Trent, which was crucial in countering the Protestant Reformation and shaping Catholic doctrine for centuries to come. Finally, Pope Leo XI, though his papacy was brief, represented the last of the Medici popes. His death marked the end of the Medici's direct papal influence, but the family's political legacy in the Church had already been firmly established. Alongside their power in the Church, the Medici family played a significant role in the politics of Italy during the Renaissance and beyond. They not only ruled Florence, but had major influence in several Italian city-states. Their ability to navigate complex political alliances with foreign powers like France and Spain ensured their continued dominance in Italian affairs. In Florence, the Medici effectively controlled the city through a series of political alliances, marriages, and strategic support of key figures. Cosimo de' Medici, the first to establish the family as a political force, did so without ever taking the title of official ruler. Instead, he controlled the city by supporting family members and allies in key positions of power. In other parts of Italy, such as Rome, the Medici family's influence was equally strong. Their papal connections allowed them to wield influence over the wider Italian peninsula, shaping political and religious decisions across Europe. Their reign in Tuscany, solidified by figures like Cosimo Verres, further reinforced their power in the region. By the late 17th and early 18th centuries, however, the Medici family's political and religious power began to decline. The changing political landscape of Europe, including the rise of other powers like Spain, France, and Austria, meant that Italy, once the center of Renaissance culture and political power, no longer held the same importance. As the male line of the Medicis died out, and with the failure of Cosimo III and his son John Gastone to produce heirs, the dynasty came to an end. Florence passed to the Habsburgs, marking the end of over 3 centuries of Medici rule. Despite their decline, the Medici family's legacy is still deeply embedded in both Italian and European history, particularly in their patronage of the arts and their role in shaping European politics. The Medici family, originally from humble beginnings in the agricultural town of Cafaggiolo, became one of the most influential families in European history. Beginning as bankers in 14th century Florence, they expanded their wealth and influence through astute political alliances, patronage of the arts, and strategic marriages. In the 15th century, Cosimo de' Medici, often regarded as the father of the Medici family, consolidated power in Florence by controlling its political landscape without ever holding official titles such as duke or king. Instead, Cosimo and his descendants skillfully manipulated Florence's republican system, placing family members and allies in key positions to ensure the family's dominance. The rise of the Medici family mirrored the growth of Florence as a city-state. It was an era of prosperity art and political intrigue all intertwined. Cosimo's success as a political leader was fueled not only by his banking empire, but also by his deft ability to manage alliances with the papacy, foreign powers, and internal factions. He established the Medici family's power in Florence, but it was the generations that followed that would push the family from influential bankers to ruling monarchs in Tuscany. Cosimo de' Medici's path to power was not immediate. Although the Medici family had been active in banking for several decades, it was Cosimo's strategic consolidation of the family's wealth and influence that allowed them to dominate Florence. In the early 15th century, Cosimo controlled the Medici Bank, one of the most prosperous banking institutions in Europe. However, the most significant aspect of Cosimo's power was his ability to manipulate Florence's republican system. Unlike the traditional rulers of Italy, such as the Sforzas of Milan or the rulers of Naples, Cosimo did not need to resort to violence or coups to secure his control. Instead, he used his financial influence to control key political offices. Cosimo carefully managed the electoral system of Florence, ensuring that his allies occupied important positions in the signoria, the governing body of the city. His diplomacy and use of patronage were instrumental in preventing opposition from rising against the Medici family. His ability to act as the de facto ruler of Florence while maintaining the appearance of republicanism is a key part of the Medici legacy. In 1434, Cosimo was formally exiled by his political rivals, but his return to power, just a year later, proved his unassailable position. His return marked the beginning of the Medici dynasty's formal control over Florence, even though the city's republican institutions remained intact. Following Cosimo's death in 1464, the Medici family continued to consolidate power. His son, Piero de' Medici, was not as politically astute as his father, but he retained control of the family's banking empire. However, it was Cosimo's grandson, Lorenzo de' Medici, known as Lorenzo the Magnificent, who would elevate the family to its greatest heights. Lorenzo's rule in the late 15th century marked a period of unprecedented prosperity for Florence. He expanded the family's political influence throughout Italy and into Europe, securing alliances with powerful families and furthering the Medici legacy through strategic marriages and patronage of the arts. In 1532, the Medici family officially transformed Florence into a hereditary duchy, and Alessandro de' Medici, an illegitimate descendant of the family, became the first Duke of Florence. This marked a pivotal moment in the history of the Medici family as they transitioned from de facto rulers to formal monarchs. While Alessandro's rule was short-lived, he was assassinated in 1537. It set the stage for the long-term consolidation of Medici power. After the death of Alessandro, his cousin, Cosimo de' Medici, ascended to power as the second Duke of Florence. Cosimo I's reign would define the Medici family's legacy as Dukes of Tuscany. With the backing of Pope Paul III, Cosimo solidified his position as ruler of Florence and the surrounding region, taking the title of Grand Duke of Tuscany in 1569. Cosimo I's reign marked the beginning of the Medici family's transition from bankers and political manipulators to hereditary monarchs. His reign was characterized by centralization of power, the expansion of Tuscany's influence in Italy, and continued patronage of the arts and sciences. Cosimo's reign also marked the family's close ties to the Catholic Church, with the Medici family becoming one of the most powerful dynasties in Europe. As Grand Dukes of Tuscany, the Medici family's influence extended far beyond Florence. The family wielded significant political, economic, and religious power across Italy, often engaging in diplomatic negotiations with other European monarchies. The Medici family's rule continued until the 18th century, when the last Medici ruler, Gian Gastone de' Medici, died in 1737, without an heir, marking the end of the Medici dynasty. The Medici family's reign in Florence and Tuscany, though prosperous and influential for several centuries, was not without its challenges. Despite their control over vast wealth and political power, the family's eventual decline was inevitable. By the 17th century, the family faced internal strife, external pressures, and the weakening of their once dominant position in European politics. Several factors contributed to the downfall of the Medici family, including the extinction of the male line, the decline of the family's wealth, and changing political and economic circumstances in Europe. The Medici family's decline is a tragic but fascinating story, showcasing how even the most powerful dynasties can falter due to a combination of external events and internal missteps. The death of Lorenzo de' Medici in 1492 marked a turning point for the family. Lorenzo had been a powerful and visionary ruler, but his passing left the Medici family vulnerable to both internal and external challenges. His son, Piero de' Medici, was ill-equipped to handle the complex political environment of Renaissance Italy. Piero's inability to maintain the family's power in Florence led to his exile in 1494 and the brief return of Republican rule in the city. While the Medici family would eventually reclaim power in Florence, their position was never the same after Lorenzo's death. The loss of Lorenzo, who had been both a political leader and a patron of the arts, marked the end of the golden age of the Medici family. The Renaissance, which had flourished under Lorenzo's patronage, began to fade as political instability and external conflicts overshadowed the family's artistic legacy. The Medici family's decline was also linked to the extinction of the male line. Lorenzo's son, Piero, was ineffectual and struggled to maintain control of Florence. His failure to secure the family's position ultimately led to his exile. Piero's son, Giovanni de' Medici, was raised in exile and had little influence on the family's future. By the time the Medici family regained control of Florence in the early 16th century, the once proud dynasty was already in decline. The final blow to the Medici family came in the 17th century when the last Medici ruler, Cosimo III, was unable to produce a male heir. Cosimo's death in 1723 marked the end of the Medici family's direct rule in Tuscany. His successor, Gian Gastone de' Medici, was the last of the male line, and with his death in 1737, the Medici dynasty came to an end. With the extinction of the Medici male line, Tuscany passed to the Habsburgs, a powerful European dynasty. The Habsburgs had long been rivals of the Medici family, and their acquisition of Tuscany marked the end of the Medici family's political power. Despite this, the Medici family's legacy lived on in the cultural and artistic contributions they had made to Florence and Italy as a whole. Though the Medici family no longer ruled Tuscany, their influence continued to shape European politics, art, and culture. The Medici family's patronage of the arts, their role in the Renaissance, and their lasting impact on the Catholic Church are all part of their enduring legacy. The Medici family's fall from power serves as a poignant reminder of the impermanence of dynasties. From humble beginnings in the banking sector, the Medici family rose to become one of the most powerful and influential families in European history. Their political, economic, and cultural legacy is still felt today, particularly in the city of Florence, where their patronage of the arts helped shape the Renaissance. Though the Medici family's direct rule over Florence and Tuscany ended in the 18th century, their legacy continues to be celebrated in the art, architecture, and institutions they supported. The Medici family's rise and fall offer valuable lessons on the complexities of power, the fragility of dynastic rule, and the lasting impact that individuals and families can have on the course of history. The Medici family's influence on the Renaissance is a tale of far-reaching cultural change. During the 15th and 16th centuries, Florence under Medici rule became the heart of a movement that would reshape art, science, and literature. The Medici, more than any other family in Renaissance Italy, played an indispensable role in the development of Western culture. The Renaissance was not only a time of artistic genius, but also a period that witnessed the birth of modern science, the rebirth of classical philosophy, and the flourishing of literature. At the core of this explosion of creativity were the Medici, who with their vast wealth turned Florence into a beacon for artists philosophers, scientists, and writers. It was Cosimo de' Medici, the patriarch, who first understood the value of patronage as a means of consolidating power and building a dynasty. By financing artists, architects, and intellectuals, the Medici family transformed Florence into a cultural hub that attracted the brightest minds of the era. The Medici family's patronage of the arts was one of the primary drivers of the Renaissance. Through their financial support, they ensured that Florence became a canvas for groundbreaking art and architecture. From Michelangelo's David to Botticelli's The Birth of Venus, the Medici patronized some of the greatest artists of the time. They employed artists such as Leonardo da Vinci, Sandro Botticelli, and Raphael, many of whom would go on to define the art of the Renaissance. Cosimo de' Medici, in particular, understood the political power of art. As a banker, he realized that art not only had aesthetic value, but could be a tool for communicating power and legitimacy. He funded the construction of the Medici Palace, a symbol of both wealth and cultural supremacy. However, it was his grandson, Lorenzo de' Medici, Lorenzo the Magnificent, who would cement the Medici legacy as patrons of the arts. Lorenzo continued his grandfather's tradition of sponsoring painters, sculptors, and architects, using their works to elevate Florence's prestige. Lorenzo's support was not limited to artists alone. He also promoted the revival of classical knowledge by funding humanist scholars who scoured Europe for lost ancient manuscripts. The collection of manuscripts, including works by Aristotle, Plato, and others, formed the intellectual foundation of Renaissance humanism. In addition to fostering art, the Medici family's cultural influence extended deeply into literature and philosophy. The Medici were pivotal in the revival of Greek and Roman philosophy, which became the backbone of Renaissance thought. Humanist scholars like Marsilio Ficino and Giovanni Pico della Mirandola flourished under Medici patronage. Ficino translated Platonic texts into Latin, and Pico wrote works that sought to reconcile the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle with Christian teachings. The Medici also helped launch the careers of many writers, poets, and thinkers who would go on to become foundational figures of the Renaissance. One of the most famous examples is Niccolo Machiavelli, whose The Prince was influenced by the political climate fostered by the Medici family. The Medici also played an important role in preserving and propagating classical literature, ensuring that the Renaissance would be both a rediscovery and a rebirth of ancient wisdom. Florence, under the Medici, was more than a city of art. It was a center of intellectual and cultural exchange. The construction of the Uffizi Gallery by Giorgio Vasari in the 16th century became an iconic testament to Medici patronage. The gallery housed the Medici collection of art, which was one of the most extensive in Europe. The construction of landmarks, like the Florence Cathedral, with its innovative dome by Brunelleschi, and the continued patronage of Florence's religious institutions further solidified the city as a cultural and architectural hub. The Medici also encouraged scientific inquiry, albeit in a more restrained manner. The family supported the work of early scientists like Galileo Galilei, who is often regarded as the father of modern science. Though the Medici's support of science was not as pronounced as their support for the arts, their patronage nonetheless laid the groundwork for the scientific revolution that would follow. One of the most distinctive aspects of the Medici legacy was their deep involvement with the Catholic Church. Over the course of the 15th and 16th centuries, 4 Medici family members ascended to the papacy, a feat that made the Medici not only powerful political players, but also influential religious figures. The rise of Medici popes helped solidify their power, both in Florence and across Europe, linking the family to the highest echelons of European governance. The first Medici pope was Pope Leo X Giovanni de' Medici, who became pope in 1513. His papacy marked the height of Medici influence within the Church. Leo X's rule was marked by indulgence and the lavish spending of the Vatican, which ultimately contributed to the Protestant Reformation. His notorious selling of indulgences, a practice where people could purchase forgiveness for their sins, sparked Martin Luther's 95 Theses and the beginning of the Protestant movement. Pope Clement VII, Giulio de' Medici. Another significant Medici pope was pivotal in the Catholic Church's response to the Reformation. Clement VII's papacy coincided with turbulent times in Europe. His tenure saw the sack of Rome by the troops of Emperor Charles V in 1527, which nearly crippled the Vatican and exposed the Medici family's vulnerability in the face of political pressures. Despite these setbacks, the Medici continued to play a significant role in the religious and political affairs of Europe. The Medici papacy helped to cement the family's power not just in Italy, but throughout Europe. The Medici's role as patrons of the arts and their papal appointments allowed them to create alliances across the continent. Their influence in the Catholic Church was such that they could sway political and religious events in their favor. The Medici were key players in many important decisions, from supporting the Catholic Counter-Reformation to negotiating between rival European powers. Through the Church, the Medici extended their power over the vast territories of Italy. Their papal connections allowed them to broker alliances with France and Spain, both of whom were significant powers in the region. The Medici also played a crucial role in maintaining the Pope's power in the Papal States, which gave them a seat at the table in discussions over European politics. The Medici family's relationship with the papacy extended beyond the ascension of individual family members to the throne of St. Peter. Their influence within the Vatican provided the Medici with immense political leverage. For example, Pope Leo X's close ties to the Medici were critical in maintaining the family's grip on Florence. The Medici's control over the papacy gave them both spiritual and political legitimacy, which allowed them to sidestep potential challenges from rival families. However, the Medici's involvement in the papacy was not without controversy. Their wealth, power, and influence were a source of resentment for many. The lavish spending of the papacy during the Medici era, particularly under Pope Leo VII, came at a time when Europe was gripped by economic hardship, contributing to the growing dissatisfaction with the church's wealth and corruption. This dissatisfaction became a driving force behind the Protestant Reformation, led by figures like Martin Luther and John Calvin, who criticized the church's practices. Despite these tensions, the Medici popes were able to use their position to bolster their family's political power. Clement VII's papacy, for example, allowed the Medici family to regain control of Florence after the brief expulsion in 1527, despite the severe challenges posed by the Reformation and the sack of Rome. The Medici family's economic legacy is perhaps most clearly seen in their establishment of the Medici Bank, one of the first truly modern banking institutions in Europe. Founded in the late 14th century by Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici, the Medici Bank revolutionized banking practices, setting the standard for future financial institutions. Giovanni's innovative banking practices, such as the use of bills of exchange and double-entry bookkeeping, helped transform Florence into one of the wealthiest and most prosperous cities in Europe. The Medici Bank facilitated international trade, allowing merchants and governments to transfer money across Europe and beyond. It was this banking empire that enabled the Medici family to exert such influence in politics, art, and religion. The Medici Bank was also one of the first financial institutions to operate multiple branches in different cities across Europe, including Florence, Rome, Milan, Bruges, and London. This expansion helped to solidify the Medici's position as a financial powerhouse and provided them with the resources to become patrons of the arts and patrons of the Catholic Church. The Medici Bank's success also laid the foundation for modern banking practices. The family's adoption of double-entry bookkeeping is widely regarded as one of the most important financial innovations of the Renaissance. Double-entry bookkeeping provided a more accurate and efficient way of tracking financial transactions, and its principles continue to be used in accounting and finance to this day. The Medici Bank's expansion into foreign markets also established the foundations for international banking. The family's ability to move large sums of money across Europe through a network of branches and credit lines made them influential players in European trade and politics. Their system of managing deposits, loans, and investments created a model that other banking families would emulate. Though the Medici Bank eventually collapsed in the late 16th century due to mismanagement and external pressures, the legacy of their financial innovations continued to shape the banking industry. The Medici family's role in the development of banking practices helped facilitate the emergence of financial systems that would play a crucial role in the rise of capitalism and the development of modern economies. Today, the Medici family's impact on banking can still be seen in the structure of contemporary financial institutions. The family's role in shaping the principles of accounting, banking, and finance paved the way for the global banking system that exists today. The Medici family's cultural, religious, and economic legacies are still felt today. Their patronage of the arts helped lay the foundation for the Renaissance. Their control over the papacy shaped European politics and religion, and their innovations in banking transformed the financial landscape. The Medici family's influence was not limited to Florence or Italy. Their impact resonated throughout Europe and continues to influence art politics and economics to this day. Despite the eventual decline of their political power, the Medici family's legacy remains a testament to the enduring influence of culture, finance, and religion in shaping the course of history. While the Medici family's political control over Florence and Tuscany ended in the 18th century, their legacy as patrons of the arts, scholarship, and culture remains unmatched. The Medici were instrumental in the flourishing of the Renaissance, and even after the family's political decline, their contributions continued to shape European culture, art, and intellectual life for centuries. This section will explore the continued influence of the Medici in these areas, focusing on their patronage that transcended political power. After the decline of the Medici's direct rule in Florence, their influence on the arts remained profound. The family's continued support for artists and intellectuals, even in the 17th and 18th centuries, helped maintain Florence's cultural prominence long after their political fall. The decline of Medici political power coincided with the rise of the Habsburg family, which took over Tuscany after the death of John Gastone de' Medici in 1737. Despite the shift in power, the Medici legacy as patrons of the arts continued notably through the patronage of art institutions and artists in the centuries following. Even as Grand Dukes, many of whom were aligned with the Habsburgs, continued to fund artists and philosophers. The Medici family's contributions were not only limited to their rule, but continued to influence art patrons after their political fall. Founded in 1586 by Francesco de' Medici, this institution became an important center for artistic and scientific studies. Even after the Medici lost political control of Florence, the institution continued to foster the arts and sciences supported by the Habsburg rulers. The Medici family's vision of Florence as a center of intellectual and artistic excellence continued through this academy, which remained a beacon of learning and innovation throughout the centuries. Perhaps one of the most lasting and tangible legacies of the Medici family is the Uffizi Gallery, which houses one of the most significant collections of Renaissance art in the world. The gallery's vast collection continued to grow even after the Medici family's political decline, as the Habsburgs maintained and expanded the Medici collection, ensuring that it remained a global center for art history and scholarship. The Medici patronage extended beyond the family's direct control as artists continued to benefit from the city's legacy of Medici funding. Some artists who worked with the Medici family were also supported after the family's decline, ensuring that their influence remained deeply embedded in the fabric of Florence and beyond. The Uffizi Gallery became an integral space for promoting Renaissance art and culture even after the fall of Medici political control. With works by renowned artists such as Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and Raphael the Uffizi, continued to be a cultural beacon. The importance of the gallery transcended the Medici and the Habsburgs, as rulers of Tuscany played a role in maintaining its prestige. While the Medici family commissioned some of Michelangelo's greatest works, such as the David and the Medici tombs, his work remained central to the legacy of the Renaissance. Even after their political fall, the Medici influence on Michelangelo's art continued to shape Florence's reputation as an art center, as later patrons drew inspiration from the works created under Medici sponsorship. In addition to their influence in the visual arts, the Medici family played a crucial role in fostering intellectual and scholarly endeavors. Florence became a center for learning and intellectual exchange during the Renaissance, and the Medici family's contributions to the fields of philosophy, science, and literature continued to shape European thought long after their political decline. Florence's status as the heart of the Renaissance was in large part due to the Medici's patronage of humanist scholars. Figures such as Marsilio Ficino and Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, whose works were supported by the Medici, shaped European intellectual life for centuries. Even after the Medici's political control waned, humanism continued to thrive in Florence. Cosimo de' Medici's establishment of the Platonic Academy in the 1460s, which was instrumental in the revival of Greek philosophy and Platonic thought, left a lasting intellectual legacy. Scholars continued to be supported by the Medici, even after their political power diminished, ensuring that the ideas of Plato, Aristotle, and later Renaissance philosophers continued to be studied and disseminated across Europe. The Medici family's support for scientists such as Galileo Galilei paved the way for scientific discoveries that shaped modern science. The family's continued support for institutions like the Accademia del Cimento helped propagate scientific thought, even after their fall from political power, allowing for continued collaboration and dissemination of scientific advancements throughout Europe. Even after the Medici's political decline, their legacy of support for the arts and intellectuals continued to influence European culture. For example, members of the family, especially those in exile, continued to act as patrons of the arts. Their impact on various art movements in France, Spain, and beyond helped to ensure that the cultural revolution they had initiated in Florence lived on. Catherine de' Medici's marriage to Henry II of France not only strengthened the Medici's ties to the French monarchy, but also allowed the family to maintain their influence in the cultural sphere. As Queen Consort of France, Catherine de' Medici patronized the arts commissioning works by Italian artists and bringing the Renaissance aesthetic to France. She was instrumental in shaping the cultural identity of the French court, ensuring that the Medici's cultural influence continued even outside of Italy. The Medici family's legacy as patrons of the arts, literature, and scholarship is one of the defining features of the Renaissance. While their political control over Florence may have ended, their influence on European culture continued for centuries. Their patronage laid the foundation for Florence's cultural dominance and helped to shape the intellectual and artistic currents of Europe. The continued support for the arts, even in exile, ensured that the Medici legacy would remain central to the Renaissance and beyond, with Florence forever remembered as the birthplace of the cultural revolution that changed the world. The Medici family, once the undisputed rulers of Florence and Tuscany, faced a slow and painful decline in the 17th and 18th centuries. The final blow to their political power came with the death of John Gaston de' Medici in 1737, marking the end of the Medici dynasty's rule over Florence. The loss of power was not an isolated event, but the culmination of several factors, including the family's declining wealth, internal divisions, and the changing political and economic landscape of Europe. This section will explore the circumstances leading to the fall of the Medici family, the end of their political rule in Florence, and the transformation of Tuscany under the Habsburgs. Lorenzo de' Medici, known as Lorenzo the Magnificent, was the last of the great Medici rulers to truly embody the spirit of the family's political dominance. His death in 1492 marked the beginning of the family's slow decline. Lorenzo's heirs, particularly his son Piero, struggled to maintain the family's political control over Florence, leading to a period of instability that would last for several decades. Piero de' Medici's inability to maintain control over Florence led to his exile in 1494, and the family was temporarily ousted from power. This event, known as the Medici expulsion, was a significant blow to the Medici dynasty. However, the family's return to power in 1512 marked a brief resurgence, but the political landscape of Florence was changing. The Medici no longer held the same sway over the city-state, and rival families such as the Pazzi and the Strozzi began to challenge their dominance. The transition of power from Lorenzo the Magnificent to his grandsons, particularly Cosimo, marked a shift from the Republic of Florence to a more centralized and autocratic rule. Despite Cosimo's successful reign as Duke of Florence, the family's political power was gradually overshadowed by the growing influence of foreign powers like France and Spain. The Medici's ability to maintain control over Tuscany was increasingly challenged by external forces, and their political strategies became more defensive. By the 17th century, the Medici family's wealth, once bolstered by their banking empire, had begun to wane. The financial struggles of the Medici Bank, which had long been a source of the family's power, were exacerbated by internal mismanagement and external political instability. The family's economic decline coincided with the rise of new financial centers in Europe such as Amsterdam and London, which further eroded the Medici's economic dominance. The Medici Bank, once one of the most powerful financial institutions in Europe, began to falter due to a combination of poor financial decisions, corrupt management, and the changing economic landscape of Europe. By the late 16th century, the bank had lost much of its former influence, and the Medici family was no longer able to rely on their financial empire to support their political ambitions. Internal division and lack of strong leadership. The absence of strong leadership in the late 16th and early 17th centuries contributed to the Medici's decline. Gastone de' Medici, the last reigning Medici, Grand Duke of Tuscany, was a weak and ineffective ruler who lacked the political acumen of his predecessors. His reign saw the further disintegration of the Medici dynasty's power in Florence, and his death in 1737 marked the official end of the family's rule in Tuscany. Following the death of Gastone de' Medici, the Habsburg family assumed control of Tuscany. The Habsburgs, one of Europe's most powerful dynasties, brought a new era of stability to Tuscany. But this also marked the end of the Medici's direct influence over the region. The transition from Medici to Habsburg rule in Tuscany was a relatively smooth one, and the Habsburgs ensured that Tuscany remained an important center of trade and culture in Italy. Under the Habsburgs, Tuscany saw the consolidation of power, with the region becoming part of the larger Habsburg Empire. While Tuscany maintained some degree of autonomy, the Medici's political control was definitively gone, and the region was now governed by a foreign dynasty. The Medici family's decline in Tuscany symbolized the changing political and economic dynamics of 18th century Europe. The Medici's influence had waned, and the rise of other European powers had relegated the family to the annals of history. Yet their cultural and artistic legacy continued to resonate throughout Europe, as Florence remained a center of art and culture even under foreign rule. The Medici family's decline was a slow and painful process, but their impact on Florence, Tuscany, and Europe was lasting. From their rise as humble bankers to their eventual fall from political power, the Medici family's legacy remains one of the most influential in European history. While their political rule in Florence ended with Gastone de' Medici's death, their cultural, artistic, and intellectual contributions continue to shape Western civilization. Even as their political power faded, the Medici family's patronage of the arts, their support of humanism, and their role in the development of European banking left an indelible mark on history. The family's legacy continues to be celebrated today with their art collections, their contributions to the Renaissance, and their role in shaping the modern world still remembered and revered across the globe. The story of the Medici family is one of extraordinary rise, decline, and lasting influence. While their political dominance over Florence and Tuscany came to an end in the 18th century with the death of Gastone de' Medici, their impact on art, culture, science, and politics continues to resonate in modern times. The Medici family's patronage helped usher in the Italian Renaissance, a period of cultural and intellectual flourishing that would have a profound effect on Europe and the rest of the world. Their legacy as patrons of the arts and as key players in European politics cannot be understated. Today, the world still feels the echoes of their influence, from the masterpieces housed in Florence's Uffizi Gallery, to the foundations of modern banking systems. Despite the Medici family's fall from political power, their contributions to European history remain vital. The family's artistic patronage, intellectual advancements, and support for humanism are central to the development of the Renaissance and the broader cultural awakening that shaped the modern Western world. The Medici's involvement in the Catholic Church, with four of their members becoming popes, also played a crucial role in shaping religious and political dynamics across Europe. In this way, the Medici family's influence transcends Florence and Italy, reaching into the heart of European politics and culture. Their story, marked by ambition, artistry, and intellectual curiosity, is far from over. It continues to inspire generations across the globe, particularly as people seek to understand the intersection of art, politics, and finance. The Medici family's legacy is inextricably linked to the Italian Renaissance, a period that radically transformed Europe's cultural, intellectual, and artistic landscape. As one of the wealthiest families in Europe, the Medici were able to shape Florence not only as a banking capital, but also as a cultural powerhouse. Cosimo de' Medici, often referred to as the patriarch of the family, was instrumental in this transformation. His patronage of artists such as Donatello and Botticelli, architects like Brunelleschi, and scholars like Marsilio Ficino helped to define the Renaissance and set Florence on the map as the cultural hub of Europe. Cosimo's grandson, Lorenzo de' Medici, Lorenzo the Magnificent, further expanded the family's artistic legacy, serving as a key patron of the renowned painter Michelangelo and sculptor Leonardo da Vinci. It was through their work, funded and supported by the Medici, that Florence became the birthplace of masterpieces that continue to shape the world's cultural heritage today. The Medici family's vision of Florence as a beacon of culture, art, and knowledge was realized not just during their time in power, but continues to influence modern society. Beyond art, the Medici's contributions to intellectual and philosophical thought were equally transformative. By funding humanist scholars and the revival of classical knowledge, the family helped to reignite the interest in Greek and Roman philosophy that laid the groundwork for the Enlightenment. Scholars such as Giovanni Pico della Mirandola and Marsilio Ficino became key figures in the Renaissance, promoting ideals that would eventually influence the likes of Descartes, Rousseau, and other Enlightenment thinkers. The Medici family's involvement in the Catholic Church further solidified their influence over European politics. With four members of the family assuming the papacy, Pope Leo X, Pope Clement VII, Pope Pius IV, and Pope Leo XI, the Medici were able to shape the policies of the Church, and by extension, the political fate of Europe. Pope Leo X, for example, played a pivotal role in the events that led to the Protestant Reformation, while Pope Clement VII's papacy saw the sacking of Rome by the troops of Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor. In the political sphere, the Medici family exerted their influence not just through force, but through diplomacy, financing, and strategic alliances. As the de facto rulers of Florence, the Medici navigated the complex web of Italian city-state politics, forging key alliances with other European powers, such as France and Spain. These alliances allowed the Medici to maintain their influence in an increasingly unstable political climate, especially as the rise of other European powers threatened to shift the balance of power away from Florence. The question of whether the Medici family should be celebrated as the true founders of the Renaissance or viewed as ruthless political power brokers is one that has been debated by historians for centuries. On one hand, the Medici were undoubtedly a family of immense political and financial ambition, using their wealth to manipulate Florence's political landscape and expand their own influence. Cosimo de' Medici, for example, was known for his ability to control the Republic without directly ruling it. He used his financial power to support political allies, ensuring that the city's government remained favorable to the Medici family. His ability to navigate the complex politics of Florence allowed him to maintain his influence for decades, despite never holding an official political title. However, this political savvy should not overshadow the Medici family's role in the cultural and intellectual awakening of Europe. While their political maneuvering was certainly a means to an end, it is clear that their patronage of the arts, science, and scholarship had a lasting impact on the course of European history. The Medici's ability to elevate Florence into a cultural capital was not merely a product of their desire for power, but a genuine commitment to advancing human knowledge and artistic achievement. The Renaissance, which blossomed under their patronage, represented a cultural revolution that laid the foundations for modern Western thought. In many ways, the Medici family was both the product and the creator of a political and cultural revolution. While they played a key role in shaping the politics of Renaissance Italy, they also laid the groundwork for an artistic and intellectual rebirth that would influence generations to come. The Medici family's contributions to the world of art, science, and philosophy were far-reaching, and their legacy has shaped the development of European and Western culture in profound ways. The Medici family's influence on European history is undeniable, but how do you see their legacy? Were they a family driven solely by power and ambition, or should they be celebrated as the true patrons of the Renaissance? What impact do you think their patronage has had on modern culture and society? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know how you view the Medici legacy. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most influential families, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more documentaries on powerful historical families and influential dynasties. Stay tuned for more content that takes you behind the scenes of history's most fascinating figures and events. Your feedback helps us bring more engaging and informative videos to you. So don't forget to share with others who might enjoy learning about the Medici and other pivotal figures in world history. Thank you for watching.